Melissa Mercer has been terminated effective immediately for gross negligence involving a VIP client account. That was the line, spoken loud and clear by Maxine Trent, our CEO, right in front of the entire company. She stood there in her cream-colored suit, crimson lipstick sharp as her tone, delivering the announcement like it was breaking news on national television. There had been no warning, no private conversation, no HR rep in sight. I turned slowly, scanning the room, former colleagues, former teammates, now just people avoiding eye contact. Some gave me that slight, awkward nod that said, "I feel bad, but hey, not my fight." And then there was Liam from Analytics Navy shirt, leaning back with a smirk. He chuckled, quietly but unmistakably, just enough for a chill to slide down my spine like someone poured ice water at the base of my neck. My name is Melissa Mercer, age 35, Senior Operations Coordinator at Glenhaven Partners, or at least I was until 900 a.m. that Friday. I stood frozen in the middle of the open-plan floor on the 14th story, where the ceiling lights were hospital white and the desks crammed together like honeycomb cells. In my hand was a dented cardboard box. Inside, a dying cactus, a ceramic mug that read, "Keep calm and recalculate." And 8 years of my life reduced to a few sad belongings. By the time I reached the lobby, the midday sun sliced through the glass, casting a long, warped shadow of the box on the marble tiles. I stepped out onto the curb next to a man summoning an Uber, still typing on his phone. He had no idea that standing next to him was someone just kicked out of their job for a mistake I wasn't even given the chance to question. I didn't call anyone, not my mom, not my girlfriend, not Marcus, the one friend I had in the office, who was definitely pretending not to see what had just happened. I just stood there, watching the crowd go by, shirt flapping loose in the breeze, thinking, well, that's interesting. Maxine thinks she just showed me the door out of Glenhaven, but maybe, just maybe, she pushed me toward where I should have been all along. This wasn't a collapse. It was a beginning. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I used to be the Senior Operations Coordinator at Glenhaven Partners, a name that sounded like a towering global consultancy. But beneath the surface was a machine far messier and far more toxic than you'd expect. I wasn't the type to give speeches or talk big-picture strategy. I was the guy who made things run. Data got updated on time. Workflows stayed unclogged. Teams moved where they needed to go. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed people not to break the system I'd spent nearly a decade refining. And for 8 years, I did that job so well. They started thinking it ran by itself. Glenhaven had its own rhythm. The printers jammed every Wednesday morning. The head of sales always showed up 7 minutes late to sync meetings, but no one dared mention it, and HR liked to call layoffs strategic transitions. I lived inside that rhythm, adjusting, absorbing, patching. No one saw it, but I knew if I ever took 3 days off, the whole thing would fall apart like a dishwasher with the wrong pipe screwed in. As for Maxine Trent, she was a phenomenon. She landed at Glenhaven like a comet, brilliant, sharp, and dangerous. 18 months in, she was promoted to Chief Operations Officer, leapfrogging 3 other candidates. 2 of them quietly left a few months later. The third stayed, but barely spoke after that. I used to be one of her believers. At the time, I thought Maxine was a different kind of leader, decisive, fast-moving, unbothered by unnecessary formalities. I once reassured a shaken junior after a brutal meeting, "Maxine's not cold, she's just efficient. Don't let the first impression fool you." Looking back, I realize I was the one who got fooled. The first crack appeared when Maxine dealt with a supervisor named Callum, the guy with perpetually red eyes from too little sleep, but who had never once submitted a report late. One Monday morning, he was called to the 15th floor. 30 minutes later, he walked out of the building with a giant backpack on his shoulders. No farewell, no thank you email. Restructuring, Maxine said flatly, in the next meeting. But I knew Callum had just wrapped a project for our biggest West Coast client, and most of the analysis data had come from me. I didn't react then, but I remembered. Then came the incident with legal. Maxine reported to the board that the new e-contract rollout was our team's proposal. I was sitting at the far end of the room staring at the presentation slide, and there it was, the exact chart I'd worked on for 2 straight nights. My name wasn't anywhere, and Maxine still smiling, still saying I didn't exist in that equation. I started pulling back. No more casual suggestions in meetings. No more improvement memos without names attached. But even when I tried to keep my distance, I remained stuck in her orbit. It was a strange kind of gravity, the kind that either pulls you in or crushes you. I wasn't the first to feel something was wrong, but I was probably the first to be broken in public. And that said everything about how she saw me, not as a threat, just an old chair ready to be replaced. Only that chair still had the keys to the server room. And what Maxine didn't know was I've always had a habit of backing things up. Evan showed up at Glenhaven late last summer, all bright smiles and a resume that made HR raise their eyebrows. Stanford Management Science major internships at 2 Silicon Valley unicorns, and supposedly co-led a 7-figure logistics initiative. It sounded flashy, maybe a bit much, but Evan was likable, polite, eager to learn. In fact, I saw a bit of myself in him, the younger me 10 years back, fired up, a little naive, and convinced that competence would speak for itself. So I took him under my wing, taught him how to audit vendor sheets, explained the difference between projected costs and committed spend, walked him through the rookie mistakes I'd made when I first started, and gave him all the tricks the internal playbook never mentions. I still remember the day he printed a data sheet with mismatched totals and said I triple-checked everything. I don't get why the numbers are off. I glanced over and replied calmly, "You forgot to exclude the test run tab before merging. Every Glenhaven file has a trap. We don't just check things, we learn where the traps are and avoid them." He nodded, eyes lighting up. Back then, I thought at least someone here is learning instead of jockeying for power. I was wrong. That morning, I had just set my coffee down when Maxine showed up. No knock. No good morning. White blazer, sharp eyeliner, red lips, like a signature written in blood. Behind her was Evan, head bowed, fingers knotted like he was trying to keep them from shaking. Conference room. Now Maxine ordered without glancing back. I followed, brain still buffering. Each step of her heels on the stone floor sounded like a countdown clock. Inside, she tossed a stack of papers onto the table. No theatrics, just muscle memory. But I knew the throw was deliberate. On top an email. I recognized it instantly. Subject line, Crowley Logistics, initial data set, attachment. The draft I'd sent Evan 3 days earlier, the one that said clearly, "Please verify all internal tabs before client delivery. You sent this file to Crowley without removing the internal data tabs," Maxine said, like I'd just detonated a bomb inside our SAP system. I blinked. A long pause. No. I sent that to Evan. He was supposed to finalize and verify before it went out. I turned to Evan, still looking down, silent. My throat went dry. "You remember what I said, right? About deleting the tabs before delivery. It's right there in the email." Evan swallowed. I thought you meant it was already final." I looked back at Maxine. "I never sent that file externally. I can show you the email thread." She crossed her arms and turned toward the glass. "Crowley is threatening to walk. If they do, we're down $12 million in annual revenue." Then she faced me, eyes razor sharp. "And I don't keep staff who hide behind interns to dodge responsibility. You've done enough. You're done. I thought the worst part would be getting chewed out behind closed doors." But no, Maxine didn't operate in the shadows. She put on a show. Back at the office, she clapped twice like calling pigeons off a rooftop. Heads turned, and then she announced, "Everyone, just to be clear, Melissa Mercer has been terminated, effective immediately, for jeopardizing a key client account. I hope this serves as a learning moment for all of you." The way she said learning moment made me feel less like an employee and more like a lab rat. I didn't look at anyone. There was no point anymore. I walked back to my desk, pulled out the old box from under it, and started packing. The cactus was shedding. The fountain pen I bought for myself after closing the Westbridge contract last year. And the external drive filled with backups Maxine didn't even know existed. I closed the lid, and as I stepped out of the elevator, one thought echoed loud and clear. Maxine thinks she just cut loose some useless background guy. The problem is, the foundation she just kicked out is the only thing keeping this whole building from collapsing. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I just lay there flat on the sofa, shirt still button tie, slack like a noose that hadn't quite tightened. In my tiny 7th floor apartment, everything fell silent. Not the kind of peaceful quiet, but the kind that made you hear the plastic inside the clock stretch with heat. Maxine's words looped in my head like a glitching tape. "You were never great, just passable." A short sentence perfectly timed enough to drown 8 years of effort in the span of one morning. The thing is, I wasn't angry about being fired. I was angry about being made a spectacle. No warning, no private conversation, no HR present. Nothing except a public execution for the sake of office optics. Maxine didn't just want to end a problem. She wanted to erase my image entirely. And that's when something started to smell off. I stood up, poured a glass of cold water. It didn't help. The bitterness stayed. I walked over to my desk, switched on the lamp, and opened my personal laptop. Not the company one. The old machine I used for drafts, backup stray notes, the one people joked about for still running a clunky HDD. I opened search, typed Crowley draft/prelim Gates LX. There it was, still there, time-stamped exactly 3 days ago. And inside the email I'd sent Evan, the very words I remembered Evan. "This is a draft. Double-check the tabs and remove internal data before sending." I sank into the chair, not from exhaustion, but from that odd feeling of finding a single grain of rice in the ashes after a fire. Not a smoking gun, but enough to ignite one thing: I'd been right. And if I was right, Maxine wasn't just wrong, she had fabricated the failure. I stared at the screen, then opened my contacts. Stone and Feldman, LLP, a labor law and internal compliance firm. I made the call. After a few rings, a steady, low female voice answered. "Stone and Feldman, this is Diane Keller." I took a breath. "This is Melissa Mercer. I need to talk about a termination that may have violated due process and possibly involves financial misconduct. I don't have formal evidence," I added, "but I have data." Diane didn't speak for a few seconds, then said, "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Send me your email address. I'll confirm the appointment and forward a preliminary intake form." I nodded as if she could see me through the phone. "Thank you. I know this might sound far-fetched, but I don't think this is just about me. She cut in calm and unshaken. You're not the first to say that. I hung up. The screen went dark. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the quiet before the blade gets sharpened. Evan was 18 minutes late. The doorbell rang twice, sharp and impatient. I opened it, and there he was. Gray hoodie zipped up to the neck, eyes sunken and dark. Whether from lack of sleep or fear, probably both. I stepped aside without a word. No welcome, no greeting. He shuffled in, fumbling with his backpack, like a student who forgot his books. I closed the door and sat down at the desk. I thought you'd be busy celebrating your new promotion, I said. Evan looked up, fingers tightening around the strap of his bag. I didn't know. Maxine would do that. She told me. You had signed off on the file. I let out a short, flat laugh, sharp, humorless. And you believed her silence. Not believed. I just didn't dare question it. That's worse. I know. I slid a glass of water toward him. He didn't touch it. Instead, he pulled out his laptop, opened it, and quietly navigated through folders. A few seconds passed. Then he turned the screen toward me. I took this screenshot the day after you were fired. I don't know if it holds any legal weight, but it doesn't make sense. I looked. It was an internal memo sent by Maxine, dated exactly 2 weeks before the Crowley incident. In the HR planning notes, a single red italicized line stood out. Preparing to replace Melissa. Propose onboarding Evan in Q2. I read it again. This was planned before the file even went out. Evan nodded, eyes fixed on the desk. She told me I needed to step up, said if I wanted to accelerate my career, I had to take responsibility. Responsibility or play a role. He didn't answer. I stood, walked over to the shelf, grabbed my external hard drive, the silver one with the chipped corner, and plugged it into my own machine. Folders popped up. One by one, I opened them. Emails, documents, screenshots, access logs. Some were messy. Most were time-stamped and properly filed. That was my habit, not because I feared being audited, but because I hated being seen as careless. As I started compiling files to send to Diane, Evan spoke, voice low, I think. She's doing the same thing to Marcus. I turned. Marcus, from internal controls. He questioned a few inconsistencies in the audit spend. Yesterday, he was told to rework the reports. And today, suddenly, he has a private meeting with HR. I leaned back in the chair, not surprised, but still chilled. Maxine wasn't just removing me. She was resetting the cycle. A pattern, a cleanup operation. You bring everything I asked. Evan nodded. Screenshots, files, notes. I've been saving things ever since it started feeling wrong. Why speak up now? He looked up. Because you were the only one who treated me like a human, not a tool, and I let her use me as a weapon. I stared at him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Good, I said. Then hand me the knife. I'll choose where to stick it back. We called it the Caleb cycle. It sounded like the name of some algorithm, and in a way it was. Once you recognized the pattern, you couldn't unsee it. Step 1. Identify the target, usually someone who knows too much or starts asking inconvenient questions. Step 2. Isolate, quietly cut off, access, reroute responsibilities, set them up to fail through tasks they never touched. Step 3. Use a younger employee, typically a smart but pliable intern, and place them in a position to take ownership. Final step. Public dismissal. No rebuttal, no recovery. Just erase them from the system. I remember seeing Caleb eat lunch alone at the 9th floor cafeteria, never stepping away from his laptop. Always precise, always careful. One time he asked me about a mismatch between a sample order and a final delivery invoice, a question nobody cared about. And then, one day he just stopped showing up. Caleb resigned, Maxine said. Personal decision. No one asked. Everyone understood ask, and you're next. Now Evan and I were retracing old steps. He dug through system logs from his old work laptop. I combed my personal inbox for scraps of notes. I once thought meaningless shift changes, sudden documentation requests, spreadsheets with matching numbers, but different contents. I sent it all to Diane, encrypted and indexed. That night, Diane called after reviewing the files. Melissa, I need to confirm something. About Caleb. You said he questioned duplicate order codes. Yeah. Invoices from the same supplier, different amounts. And a few days later, he vanished. And this has happened more than once, one case with me. Another just recently with Marcus. And I'm sure there's more. I don't think we're dealing with a wrongful termination anymore. We may be looking at a pattern of manipulation and possibly internal embezzlement. I said nothing for a few seconds. That familiar chill ran through me again, but this time it came with something new clarity. What's the next step? I'll speak with a policy attorney at the Office of Corporate Integrity. You stay quiet, no exceptions. The next morning, Evan sent me a short audio file. I don't know if it's admissible, he wrote, but I think you should hear it. It was a recording from his meeting with Maxine a few days earlier. Her voice came through clear, controlled, dripping with authority. We don't need people nitpicking every detail. What matters here is maintaining stability. If that means removing a few individuals to protect the company, so be it. I don't need your agreement. I need your compliance. I sat still. Evan didn't speak. Neither did I. Just the hum of the laptop fan and the faint sound of traffic from the street below. You realize what you just did? I asked. Evan nodded. Gave you the final nail for the coffin. I forwarded the recording to Diane along with a short message. We have what we need to begin. And for the first time in weeks, I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to prepare. The conference room on the 21st floor was so quiet, I could hear a pen tapping gently against a notebook, one of the investigators, methodical and sharp. The walls were glass trimmed with oak, offering a three-sided view of the city. But at that moment, every light seemed to converge on me, the only person in the room who no longer worked at Glenhaven. To my left sat Diane Keller, the only woman I'd ever seen silence, 3 corporate lawyers with a single nod. Across from us were the investigation panel, a partner from an independent audit firm, an external head of corporate ethics, and a board member I'd never seen before. Silver hair, tired eyes, the kind of man who looked like he'd been fed up with governance transparency years ago. Thank you for being here, Mr. Mercer. The auditor began, his voice cautious. We'd like to clarify a few details regarding your termination and certain internal processes. Diane lifted her head. Before Mr. Mercer says anything, let me be clear. This meeting is not a favor. It's a courtesy, and this time he will be heard all the way through. A beat of silence. No objections. I drew a breath. I won't take long. I'm not here to justify. I'm here to explain how a process was twisted into a weapon. I started with the Crowley file, the draft, the email to Evan, the line clearly stating it needed to be reviewed and cleaned. Then came the revoked access, no reason, no notice. I presented the invoice discrepancies, 2 payments for the same vendor, different amounts, over $12,000 apart. I named names: Caleb, who raised red flags and then disappeared. Marcus, now under internal review after questioning financial data. I saw the older board member freeze at Marcus's name. That name apparently wasn't new to him. Then I brought up the internal memo Evan had uncovered, the onboarding plan drafted before the Crowley incident even occurred. Finally, I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Not a sound in the room. Only Maxine's voice, cold, sharp, controlled. If we need to remove a few individuals to protect the company, then so be it. I don't need your agreement. I need your understanding. When the recording ended, I didn't look at anyone. I looked straight at the space in the middle of the table, imagining Maxine still standing there, still composed, still smirking like she always did. The auditor cleared his throat. We'll need to verify the recording. Diane didn't even glance at her notes, already authenticated. Full metadata extractable from the device. A certified copy can be submitted to the court if required. The HR rep, the same one who avoided my eyes in elevators for 2 straight years, kept her head down, scribbling furiously, like she was trying to outrun the truth. As we left the room, Diane turned to me and said, "They didn't argue because there's nothing left to deny. You can sit still for a while now. It's their turn to scramble." I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel relieved, just quiet. But this time, it was the quiet of someone who finally got to finish his sentence. As I stepped outside Glenhaven's building, the sunlight slapped my face like a wake-up call. Evan was waiting by the curb, hands in the pockets of his hoodie, face still carrying traces of uncertainty. They just called me in. I told them everything from the fake leadership program she made up to how she pressured me into backdating my onboarding documents. I nodded. "You did the right thing." Evan paused. "No, you did the right thing first." I just followed. That night, I got a message from Marcus, just 4 words. "She's been suspended." Another came from Diane. "The investigation is expanding. They'll be reviewing all terminations from the past 3 years. I sat in the dark, lights off, staring out over the city. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone standing on the sidelines anymore. I left Glenhaven the same way I first walked out of it, without looking back. They sent me a formal offer bundled with a salary double what I used to earn, and a shiny new title, Director of Ethics and Transparent Culture. It sounded like they wanted me to come back and clean up the ashes from a fire they'd once let Maxine ignite. Diane reviewed the contract, set it down, then looked at me. "If you go back, you'll control the structure. But if you don't, you'll stay in control of yourself." I signed the document, the one that said no thanks. 3 weeks later, I accepted a position with a nonprofit that supports whistleblowers. No spotlight, no executive badge, but every time someone began with, "I don't know if anyone will believe me, but," I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. Evan left Glenhaven too. He sent me a simple email. I found a place where asking questions isn't seen as a threat. And I'm grateful you taught me how to ask the first one. A year later, an email from Glenhaven landed in my inbox. Sender Miriam K., the new CEO. Subject, keynote speaker, Corporate Integrity Summit, 2025. I almost ignored it. I had no reason to return to those cold glass walls. But then I remembered what Diane said to me after our final investigation hearing. "You didn't just dismantle a broken system. You rewrote the rules of the game." So I said yes. I stepped onto the stage in a deep navy suit. Not my favorite color, but the same color Maxine used to wear when she wanted to project authority. On me, it didn't look like armor. It looked like clarity. The room was silent. Hundreds of eyes were on me, some young, some gray-haired. People who had once believed silence meant safety. People who had never dared to speak up. I scanned the crowd, then said I was once called useless. I stood in the middle of an open office, surrounded by people who didn't speak a word for me. I became a cautionary tale, not because I failed, but because someone needed to protect a system that was already failing. I paused, letting the quiet sink in. But here's the thing about being underestimated. When they don't see you, they also don't see the strength you're building, brick by brick, boundary by boundary, silence pushed to the edge. Someone in the front row nodded slowly. I looked to the very back of the room. If you're in a room where telling the truth feels like risking everything, maybe that's not the room you should be in. And if you can't change the structure, at least leave the door open for the next person. The room erupted in applause, but I didn't smile, didn't bow. I stood tall, because this time I was the one holding the mic. And I knew my voice now carried louder than any recording ever could. After the talk, I got a message from Marcus, the man who'd almost become the next casualty. I've been reinstated, and I'm rebuilding internal controls with one principle only. Transparency is not a slogan, it's a practice. Another message came from a new hire at the Post-Maxine Glenhaven I heard you speak today. And now I understand why staying silent when something's wrong is never an option. I turned off my phone, standing alone in the long hallway outside the auditorium. A breeze drifted in through a narrow window, not enough to move the curtain, but just enough to take me back to that morning, the one where I left Glenhaven with a cardboard box and a fire in my chest. Now, I don't need the fire anymore. I have a voice, and I will never let it be taken again. It's a quiet Sunday morning. I'm sitting in a small cafe near home, the one with the worn-out wooden chair by the window, the espresso that's always a little too bitter, and the soft jazz from the ceiling speakers that makes time feel like it's trying to slow down. On the table in front of me is a brand new notebook, blank, untouched. But in my mind, there are hundreds of stories waiting to be written. I've been through a journey I once thought was just a career misstep. Turns out it was a full dismantling and rebuilding of myself. From someone who used to stay in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly, I've learned to step forward and speak, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I couldn't let others be crushed in silence the way I once was. I've seen the worst a system can offer: coldness, manipulation, abuse of power, dressed in professional language. But I've also seen the best courage sparked from fear truth, preserved in emails most would ignore, and good people moving quietly toward justice without ever asking for applause. If you're reading this and you're someone who's been pushed aside, made to feel small, told you're not good enough, not the right fit, I want you to hear this. Don't let them define you by the silence they build around you. You are not a mistake. You are not a burden. You are the one holding the truth, and that, however small, weighs more than any title on any office door. Keep doing what's right. Keep writing it down. Keep looking them in the eye. And when it feels like no one is listening, remember, there are people like me listening very closely, and we're not silent anymore.